This is Jake Wizicki with an ACT Science conflicting viewpoints question. Now, this is one of the trickiest types of conflicting viewpoints questions that they can ask because it requires you to really have a good understanding of both researcher 1's perspective and researcher 2's perspective. So if you get this kind of question, I recommend just reading the whole passage and really making sure that you understand what's going on, because otherwise it's really difficult to understand what you usually miss something that makes you get the question wrong. But if you did read the whole passage, you sort of get the gist that researcher 1 doesn't think that traditional measures of measuring animal metacognition. So if you don't know what metacognition is, it's defined right here, the awareness of one's own thought process. So researcher 1 believes that traditional methods of measuring human metacognition didn't work on animals, but there were recent studies where they did something different using correct responses and incorrect responses, and that did show that animals were capable of metacognitive processes. So that's researcher 1's perspective. Old methods didn't work, but we have good methods now, and they show that animals, yes, they have metacognitive processes. They are able as humans are to reflect and monitor the states of their own minds. So that's researcher 1's perspective. And researcher 2, on the other hand, does not believe there's not enough evidence. Does not believe that animals are capable of metacognitive processes. And the reason is that researcher 2 does not believe that there's sufficient, that the methods that they use, so the markers that many scientists use to measure metacognition, does not believe that those are effective. They're not sufficient to prove animals have metacognitive properties. Researcher 2 talks about surprise, that was once used to imply metacognition, because the researchers thought that it was an awareness of one's thoughts, but then the researcher 2 goes on to say that it's not actually an awareness. It's just a first order phenomenon, a discrepancy between a creature's current judgments, not necessarily an awareness of those judgments. So you really have to read into both of these perspectives to understand that that's what's going on. Researcher 1 believes that, like I said, that the animals are capable. These studies show it. Researcher 2 says that no methods are capable, or none of these methods are effective in measuring metacognition. So now that we understand that, let's go into the passage and look at the answers here, into the question. So it's choice A says the ability to select an uncertain. So researcher 2 would respond to this evidence by researcher 1 by saying the ability to select an uncertainty response is strong evidence to support metacognition in animals. We know that's wrong right away because we know that researcher 2 does not believe there's enough evidence to support metacognition. There's definitely no way an animal could possess metacognitive capabilities. So you might be tempted to choose this one. Let's leave it on here for now because researcher 2 does not believe that there is enough evidence to support metacognition. But if you read the way that researcher 2 talks about it, it's sort of a scientific approach. There is not enough evidence currently to support metacognition in animals. Not that there is definitely no way. That could be too strong of a statement for what researcher 2 says. We'll come back to that. C, in the same way that observed surprise in animals showed an awareness of its own beliefs, the selection of an uncertainty response indicates that animals are aware of their own beliefs and opinions. So if you read this and you see surprise, it might be a good idea if you don't remember to go back to the passage and read about surprise. But researcher 2 does not actually think that surprise showed metacognition. You see here, the problem with this train of logic is it's merely a first order phenomenon, and it does not show that an animal is aware of its judgments. So that actually is not what researcher 2 said about surprise, though if you didn't read carefully, you might think it was. It's choice D, the ability to select an uncertainty response does not necessarily require that an animal has metacognitive abilities. So this is the right answer. It's choice D. And it's the right answer because this is the most accurate representation of researcher 2's response. Because researcher 2 would say, just like surprise, that the selection of an uncertainty response is not require that an animal is aware of its own judgments in the first place. And so if we look at researcher 2's perspective, that is, from what researcher 2 presented, that is the best way that we could assume that researcher 2 would respond to researcher 1's argument. Because researcher 2 doesn't say there's definitely no way an animal could possess metacognitive abilities. It just says there's not enough evidence yet to support it. So this is the right answer. This is a distractor answer. Answer choice is D.